Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to get the chance to sit down with you and learn more about you and your experience in the career field. So first, we'd love to know just more about you and what you're doing now.
So I'm Kat. I am a recruiting lead over at Microsoft. I focus on our female vertical and work with events and conferences. So really working to bring more women to Microsoft and increase the women population in tech. In terms of just my background in relation to Molly Rapert's marketing class, I took her class in 2015. It was one of my favorite classes during school. I was a marketing and management major, and how I got to know Molly was I made a B in the course, and I was really bummed. I thought I was never going to have a successful career. I thought that, because I had made that B, that I wasn't going to be able to land any internships or work at any great companies, and that was the end for me. But through seeing that wasn't the end, I kept in communication with Molly and stayed in touch over the years.
It's funny you say you got a B just because Molly speaks, so highly of you to our class. Before we get into more your professional life, would you care to share? I noticed on your LinkedIn that you have a pretty interesting story that you moved here from Russia at a really young age. Would you care to share on that a little bit?
Yeah. So growing up, I grew up in Texas. I was adopted when I was 5 years old and went through a traditional childhood of, elementary school, middle school, all of that I did in the States. And as I progressed to college, I really wanted to just blend in and not have a lot of people question about, my history. And I had a lot of shame around being adopted. I didn't want anyone to pity me or to really dive in and ask too many questions because I wasn't ready to talk about it. It wasn't until I moved to Seattle and started working at a young adult shelter where I met a couple of individuals and was seeing them on a weekly basis. And I got asked, why do you bother to show up? I was running from my job downtown to in the evenings setting up cots and doing showers and roll call and all of that. And so that question really did make me wonder, like why am I doing this? Why am I so interested in working with like youth? And why did I care about homelessness and all of that? And it really just stemmed from my own personal background of I was born in Russia, and my parents got divorced at a really young age, and I was put into an orphanage. And for a while, it was just tough to talk about. But I realized through just everything in life that the things that happen to you early on really impact who you become and the reason why you do things.
Very cool.
No, I love that you're like passionate and open about your past now and like use it in your everyday life. My name is Morgan and I'm a marketing major. My first question for you is, what is one word you would use to describe yourself and why?
So I would hyphenate the word. I'd probably say I'm like a serial optimist. There's nothing that, I don't think that I can accomplish. And that's not out of like sheer confidence that I can just do anything and everything that I want. But I do think that, if there's anything in life that you want to achieve, there are ways to get there. And even for myself, like I push myself to do, I push myself, and I'm really positive, and I think there's nothing that I can't accomplish.
Yeah, you can never say never. I definitely like that. I'm Josh. I'm also a marketing major, and I was wondering, like you said earlier, how you got to be in Molly's class, and you were like, "Oh, how am I going to get this internship?" So obviously you lacked a bit of confidence, and we were wondering what helped you gain confidence in yourself at the beginning of your career.
Yeah, so I mean, starting out, I didn't have any internships. All of my experience was really I was a student ambassador on campus, I was a camp counselor, and I was volunteering to read to kids after school. All of my out of school experience was revolved around like kids and helping youth and trying to incorporate marketing, but it was really tough to land internships for me. So that really broke down my confidence. My first job out of school, I was selling car insurance and working in the rain. And I would say there are a couple things that helped me to build confidence. I would probably break it down into there was in my first job, I had someone from booking.com reach out to me while I was working with them to interview for them. And they said that they saw qualities in me that I hadn't seen in myself. And then through that interview process, I was able to see, okay, I had a lot of customer service experience, but it wasn't limited to just that. I could take that experience and pitch it as, I'm customer centric and I can communicate and all of that. Second thing was I had a chance to read a book. It was called Creative Confidence, which is what kind of pushed me to send the articles that I did. And that book changed my perspective of, what it means to have confidence. Being confident doesn't mean that you just think you're right, but you're open to the ideas of others. You're open to making iterations. And I had never seen myself as like a creative person, but I really wanted to be one. And I realized that you didn't have to start off being creative or have all the best ideas. And then I had a couple of people throughout my career who really poured into me and believed in me before I did in myself. And so I think those are all three things that helped me to gain confidence.
That's great. That's really encouraging, especially as a young professional who lacks confidence in myself. I would love to know specifically what advice you might have for someone who moves to a brand new city, because I think that's a fear I and a lot of my peers have, is if we move for a job and we don't know anybody, somewhere we've never been, just any advice you might have on how to adjust to a new place.
Yeah, so I moved to Seattle like right out of college, and I had never lived in a big city. I would say some advice would be to get plugged into things that interest you. So for me, I knew that I wanted to do some kind of volunteering in the realm of working with homeless youth. And so I found Roots, which is a young adult shelter. And I did the same thing moving to Portland. So I live in Vancouver area now. I've kind of been all over. But I would say get involved in some kind of like service that you're actually passionate about or care about, because one, it's going to give you like a sense of purpose, but then also you'll meet people that have similar interests. And it doesn't have to be a homeless shelter per se. It could literally be anything. I know people who are involved in, tech, but on a nonprofit side. And so that I would say, get involved in meetup groups, look at local gyms. I got into hot yoga after college, which was something I never thought I would be into. Same with hiking. So looking for hobbies. I go to a climbing gym. Like there are various different things to get involved in. And I think that's the easiest way to build community, is centering it around hobbies, interests, things that you like to do outside of work, because that's where you'll meet some genuine connections.
Going off of like finding the creative side of like yourself, what advice do you have someone to like find that creative side of themselves without like any parameters of fear?
Yeah, so I mean, without any parameters of fear, I think we all have fear. And in the article that I'd sent over, it kind of talked through a couple of those. For me personally, my greatest fear, it came down to me identifying, okay, what am I scared of? Like in making this decision or in coming up with idea, like what is the worst case scenario? What is, why am I scared to take that first step? What am I scared that people are going to be judging me? Like what would those judgments be? And a lot of those stemmed from my own personal views of myself or of how others would perceive me. But I would say identifying like what are your fears initially, and then combating them with, okay, worst case scenario, like what would come from this? So I think a couple were like, losing control, not knowing like the first step to take, being judged, not knowing, that much about your subject. Those are all things that initially scared me. But when I broke those down, it's helped me to, be less fearful.
In Molly's class, I'm not sure when you came through, but now a lot of her focus is on LinkedIn, and a lot of our assignments are basically posts on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if that's was kind of her philosophy when you kind of came through. But I noticed that you have a very, very, very impressive LinkedIn. If I'm reading it right, I'm looking at 100,000 followers, which is pretty incredible. How did you kind of build that up, and how has that impacted your career?
So in terms of impact, I mean, I don't have to apply for jobs, which was ultimately my greatest struggle coming out of school. Was I was applying everywhere and no one was responding to me. And so I saw LinkedIn as a tool that could help if done right. Like I would no longer have to go after jobs. Like I wanted people to know me before I met them, which sounds really weird. But in regards to LinkedIn, when I was in college, my dad told me to get a LinkedIn, and I was like, it's for old people. Why would I want to get a LinkedIn? No one that I know is on it, and that's still one of the greatest issues. Is there are a lot of university students, but LinkedIn doesn't have every student on campus, and people aren't active, and people aren't very interested in it, but it is a tool that can change your life. And every opportunity that I've had, every job that I've had has come from LinkedIn. In terms of building it out, I got kind of thrown into it. I was a contractor at Amazon, and I had a leader come to me and say, I need you to build out a workshop and centralize make sure that all the content is the same across the board for our university recruiting team. I want to look like, we're one team, not just random people, recruiting. And so went to Google, started researching, how do you build out your brand? How do you all look in sync? How do you change your headlines and titles and all of that? And I tried to throw a PowerPoint together. I had no idea what I was talking about. But then through that experience, I was interested in getting into university recruiting, and I was a coordinator and I was a contractor, and I kept having people say, you don't have the experience to do what you want to do. So I just designed a project for myself on LinkedIn. I was like, I'm going to make a challenge to meet as many college students as possible in coffee shops and interview them and learn about the struggles that they're going through, because I want to, solve this problem that I'm experiencing. And so that's kind of how LinkedIn started. That's how it blew up for me, was I started meeting people one-on-one. I don't think I'm the best in terms of marketing strategy. I think mine's very organic, through meeting people, through creating relationships, through interacting with people, helping them land jobs. And then ultimately that circled back for me as well. But I do agree with Molly. Like when I took her class, LinkedIn was not something that we focused on, but I wish it was something that we had done, because coming out of school, I had no idea the different career paths I could take. I had no idea, who all was out there. I didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know how to build out a resume. It was something that I kind of had to learn post-college.
Very cool.
Your LinkedIn is very impressive. I'm back with another creative question. How do you practice and continually develop your own creativity?
In all honesty, I think I try to continue exploring things that interest me, which I know sounds really vague. But within creative confidence, something that really appealed to me was not having to have ideas completely thought out. As we grow up, we have parameters that we put around our ideas, or we feel like we have to have a complete thought or have to turn in the finished product, and it has to be perfect. And for me, in terms of just creating, I give myself space to not have the final product, not have the finished answer. And I'm really interested in design thinking and bringing a more empathetic approach to ideas, really understanding outside of just having a problem, going to the root of the problem and trying to learn as much as possible. So I was really interested in working in university recruiting, and the more research that I did in meeting with students, I learned that it's not only just a LinkedIn problem or students, not having the tools at the college age, but it really stems a lot earlier than college. And then it also goes beyond just college. Like early career is what I'm interested in now, not just university. And so I'm learning as much as I can in my current roles to hopefully be able to, solve. I don't think I can completely solve the issue, but to be able to improve, the job hunting process for students as well as people early 1 to 3 years in their career. So I'm always doodling, I'm always drawing. I worked at a startup for a little while that centered around helping university students and creating a different platform from LinkedIn. And through that process, I've learned, changes that I would make and things that I would do differently, and that's still an interest area for me. But I give myself the space to not think that you have to have the solution or the problem fixed right now, and that it's an ongoing process. And with design thinking, you can be prototyping, but you can also go back to, thinking about the problem and making changes to what you're trying to solve.
That's really interesting. I love that approach to problem solving. My question is about a career in recruitment specifically, because I think it's a really interesting field, but in my job and internship search, I've been struggling to find any entry-level positions in that field. So I was wondering what type of experience would be good to have on someone's resume if they're interested in a career in recruitment.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, I think you can have any major to be in recruitment. You can have your experience can be as ambiguous as me, like camp counselor, ambassador on campus, to having internships in, marketing or sales or anything else. I think there are two paths to get into recruiting. There are agencies. So there's agency recruiting where there's agency and there's corporate side. Corporate side, the easiest way to get into like a big tech company or a large company is through contracting. And contracting is something that I didn't know about in college. It's similar to an internship in that you'll have, 3 to 6 months to 9 months at a company, and then you'll interview for a full-time position. Agency is a little bit more of a grind. They get people in usually in college, and you're doing a lot of like cold calling, lead generation. You learn all aspects of recruiting. But in terms of just like what kind of background, I would say it's a lot of like marketing, sales, lead generation, working with people, being able to communicate. You have two customers, so you have candidates, but you also have the business. So you have to be able to understand the needs of both and convey those needs to both sides and be an advocate for candidates. But at the same time, you have goals and metrics that you have to hit. So I would say some good places to look in terms of opportunities. I mean, LinkedIn probably has a wide variety, but I would look up some recruiting agencies. I can give you some names offline if you're interested. And then I would look into recruiting coordinators. People usually start as recruiting coordinators and then transition into recruiting. It gives you a side of recruiting that like you get to understand like the scheduling and how candidates, go through the interview process. And then recruiting is more so like you're finding the candidate and you're working with them to prep them and close them for a role.
That's some great advice for anyone that's interested in a career in recruitment. So you've worked multiple jobs and multiple different companies. When you're working in a position, what are some signs that a different company or position is going to be better for you?
In all honesty, I always have my like LinkedIn opportunities open. So I'm constantly getting messages from recruiters just letting me know about roles that are open. In terms of knowing the like right time to make a move, for me personally, since I didn't have internships coming out of college, I did some contract work prior just to gain experience, and then I went back to Amazon full time. In terms of like knowing when to transition, for me, it's always been, who is my leader going to be? So when someone reaches out, if they seem interesting or they seem like they're someone I would admire or want to talk to, I at least entertain the call. I think people get caught up with the big company names, but it's really who is your manager, who is their senior leadership, what does that look like, what are the goals of the team? And usually for me, I mean, what inspired me to make the transition from Amazon to Microsoft was a mixture of, this role was going to be a leadership role. I was going to have a team. It would be pushing me outside of my comfort zone of I was an individual contributor previously. But with this role, I would be, leading a team. Also just learning about like the company, like their perks and benefits and all of that is super important too. But just a combination of learning who will be leading you and what you'll be doing. If that seems interesting to you, then don't be afraid to make a change. I think I was scared out of college. Everyone said you had to be in a role for a year or more, or else you look like a job hopper. And in this day and age, people are taking opportunities and moving up, and sometimes you can even increase your salary more by making a switch than staying in a position and waiting for a promotion.
Kind of on the topic of promotions and kind of working your way up within a company, how do you balance doing something you're passionate about while also making sure to help yourself, obviously financially, and put yourself in, maybe the most prestigious, role possible, kind of balancing between your passion and career success?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have like the exact answer, but for me personally, taking time outside of work. So I was working in retail management and wasn't really sure if it was for me. And so took time outside of work to identify, what are things that I'm interested in? Where am I putting my hours in outside of work? I really loved outdoors, really loved working with students, really loved what aspects of my job do I actually like. And so when I worked at Target, I was interviewing people, I was onboarding associates. I hated the hours and I hated all aspects of retail except for that people aspect. And so taking that and incorporating it into my next role. And then in the next role, understanding like, hey, I really like working with students. How could I make that into a career, and how could I make that, something that I'm doing more than just, outside of work? And then from there, it was working with students and realizing I really love like the account management piece of my work. I really want to create relationships more long term. I want to try, something else. It's just constantly questioning, where you're at, what aspects do you like, what do you not like, what can you take off of your plate, what can you add on, in terms of monetarily making sure you're set up financially for the future. I think financial literacy is really important, and that's something that you also don't learn a lot in school. And so taking time to learn that outside of class of, how could I set myself up for the future financially, but also knowing that like you can do that doing something that you enjoy. I think pushing yourself to keep exploring those options of things that you like, and then also learning how can you monetize that.
Very cool. I like how you highlight the progression of kind of learning more about yourself. I think we're all kind of about to go through that, coming out of college, because for all we know, we could have studied some all through college, and then in real life, it might not be what we want to do. And we kind of progress from there and figure out what we want to do long term. Yeah.
You also don't have to have it figured out. Like, I mean, what you think you want to do now might be completely different from what you wind up doing in 5 years. Right. That's also okay. Like it's okay to not even know all of your options at this point. But as long as you're pushing yourself to kind of explore and learn, I think that's the biggest thing.
Okay, so you worked for Target, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft. These are all very large companies. When did you decide to pursue, like you were going to start pursuing working in these large corporations, or is this something that's just happened?
It's kind of a combination. So I started off working at, Target, and that's a large company. That more so was just, what opportunities could I get with the degree that I have? But I've transitioned since then to the tech side. And For me, I really like the tech space, mostly because of the individuals that I work with. Uh, Working for big companies, I mean, you have the opportunity to scale, you have the opportunity to meet a lot of people, there's opportunities for mentorship. And the best part that I would say, I've worked at a startup as well with bigger companies. What I like is that at the end of the day, I can shut my laptop off. I know that no matter what happens, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Target, all these places are still going to be there the next morning. And there's nothing that I can do that will completely destroy everything. So I have that balance between working and having a life. Whereas when I worked at a startup, I felt like my life was the startup and I was really focused on building out someone else's dream. And I know a lot of people have mixed views on that. I think startups are great if you're looking to get a lot of hands-on experience, try out all different things. It's a lot of chaos. There's not a lot of structure. So if you thrive in that kind of environment, I think startups are great. I really enjoy working at the big companies because I get to, with recruiting, I work with a high number of people, I don't know, a lot of different people. And so that to me is interesting. And there's opportunity to also pivot if I decide, I have so many interests of I like marketing, I like management, I like recruiting, I like account management, all of that. So if I want to create a role, it's very easy at a large company. Whereas with a smaller company, I don't know if you would have as much exposure. But it really just depends. I think both are great, and you don't have to have, in order to work at a big company, you don't have to have previous experience at large companies, as long as you can see the impact that you've made across a smaller business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's great to hear your perspective on startup versus corporate because it's a big decision we all have to make. Our last question is, as a recruiter, do you have any stories of bad practices a candidate has done that made them stand out negatively, or something unique that made a candidate stand out positively?
Yeah. So in terms of negative things, when I saw the question, I think so. There's nothing. I don't have anything too crazy, but I think the worst thing that has ever happened is just individuals not showing up for their interview day of, or notifying you day of they can't make it. It's really rough because there's a lot of planning and scheduling and time that goes into creating an interview. I know that a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes work, so I would say that's probably the worst part. But in terms of things that candidates have done to stand out, to me, when I see a resume and I see passion projects on there, or someone's involved in some kind of service, or I always tell people, if you go do something crazy like the PCT, or you take an amazing trip for 6 months or a year. A lot of people are scared to take sabbaticals or time off. I say include that on a resume because it really shows who you are outside of just work. But I also think having certifications, having things that you've taken the initiative on and not necessarily been guided or had to do, those scream to who you are. And then in terms of just things that candidates have done that really stand out, I think just how people interact and treat you when you're working with a recruiter, just remembering that person's also a human being, and being able to just relax and talk and communicate and be appreciative. And I love when people send thank you notes or allow me to know at the end of it, oh, I accepted the offer and it's changed my life, or this really helped me to learn something new, or I don't know. And when candidates will reach back out in 6 months or a year and update you on what they've been able to do at a company, I think that's awesome. So those are things that stand out. I haven't had anything too extreme happen. So.
Well, good. Maybe that's for the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for making time to answer our questions. This has been amazing. I know I've learned so much, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. I'm sorry that it was on Teams, but hopefully, yeah.
We were joking. It's probably more appropriate that you use Teams.
Yeah,
You're a little biased.
Yeah, maybe it was meant to be. But yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, have a good day.
You too.